You're very, very welcome, Ambassador Byrne Nason. We're delighted to have you here, and welcome back to everyone else for the second part and the final part of our AGM. So yeah, you're very welcome indeed. We've had a full morning already this morning looking at the AGM and the regular business of it. So I'm just going to remind everyone, really put your cameras on if you can, so we can see who you are, but please stay on mute. And for those of you who are newly joining for this section of the agenda, my name is Finola Finnan. I am the current chairperson of the Dóchas network, and I'm the deputy CEO of Trócaire in my day job. I'm deeply honoured and privileged to welcome Ambassador Geraldine Byrne Nason to give the keynote address at our AGM today. So thank you very much. Ambassador Byrne Nason, as you all know, is the permanent representative of Ireland to the United Nations in New York. A position that she's held since 2017. She very ably chaired the United Nations Commission to the Status of Women for 2018 and 2019. And she spearheaded Ireland's very successful campaign for a seat on the UN Security Council in June 2020, in what was undoubtedly, Ambassador, a highly competitive campaign. And we were watching it closely from here. And we championed and acknowledged it last year at our AGM. So we warmly congratulate you on the success of that campaign, and are very proud to see Ireland take its seat at the highest level of diplomacy for the term 2021 to 2022, at a time when leadership is really badly needed on peace and security. So a very important time for us. We really want to thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning. We know it is early in the morning for you in New York, 7:30, I believe, and I'm sure you have a very busy agenda ahead of you, as you do every day. Ireland had a focused set of priorities coming onto the Security Council, based on three key principles: building peace, strengthened conflict prevention, and ensuring accountability. And I think it's very positive to hear Ireland talking about the importance of upholding international human rights law as part of peace building, and something we talk about a lot here. Your office, the Irish office of the UN in Geneva, and indeed the political division here in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, led by Sonia Hyland, has established a really open dialogue and engagement with civil society here. And I know the members want to thank you very much for that and really welcome it. And we want to be ready, we are ready and willing to support Ireland's role in whatever way we can. And I think the insights and perspectives we can bring from our country offices and from the communities we work with is really important. And we bear witness to a lot of the atrocities that are playing out in our world today. It's a very challenging time, I'm sure, to be on the Security Council with the pandemic, the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East, and we see what's happening at the moment in Gaza. The worsening situation in Yemen, and of course the human rights atrocities we've seen very recently in Tigray and Myanmar. And I know from my own colleagues, the reports we're hearing are absolutely horrific. Really awful levels of sexual violence and widespread repression and killing of human rights defenders. And we're hearing it on a daily basis in our own briefings back in the office. You also joined the Security Council at a time when I think global politics in general was extremely fraught, and I'm sure it was challenging, or it is challenging, to get the right issues on the table. So 4 months into Ireland's term on the Security Council, it would be really interesting to hear from you how your agenda is progressing. Are you able to influence the way you had hoped to and push for some of the issues that you're campaigning on and have campaigned on? And members of Dóchas would also like to hear what advice you'd give us about how we can support your role and how we can engage in the best way possible. So we're going to have about 20 minutes or so, and we will have questions and answers. So Ambassador Byrne Nason, without further ado, I'll give the floor to you, and we're really interested to hear what you might have to say. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Finola. Great to be with you all. And really, just to pick up on the point you make in the introduction, Finola, I want to start off by saying a big thank you to everyone here. We certainly regard our period here on the Security Council as one of partnership with all of those of you represented this morning. You said it, Finola, we rely on what we hear from you in the field. We rely on the insights you give us about the trends across the relationships, particularly in fragile contexts. So a big Gurmila Mahagav already from side here in New York, and every day I know Minister Coveney and Sonia Hyland speak so highly of the support they're getting. And I can tell you, I will come back to it a little bit in my remarks, but we are seen at the UN, and particularly now at the Security Council table, as real advocates and partners for civil society writ large. So again, thanks. It's great to have a chance to speak to you, and I hope that we can do this in an iterative way as we go along over the 2 years. We're, as you said, just getting our feet under the table now, but we're benefiting from these conversations already. And you said it, Finola, it's in a time of great uncertainty. And also, you know, the term you used, I use almost daily here, it's a fraught international environment. So we're challenged almost hourly, I will say, in terms of not what we've committed to do or the values and principles we're delivering on, but the actual reality of what we're grappling with at the table of the Security Council. So yeah, 4 months in, and a tough 4 months, but we're still breathing, as I like to say. And I'll give you a few impressions, if I can, in the next 15 minutes or so about where we see ourselves, and then what the nature of our cooperation can be going forward. Look, just contextually, I kind of remind myself of this regularly as I sit at the table. You know, we came on as a so-called small elected member state, small and geographically at least peripheral, but we've never seen our role here at the UN as either a small one or a peripheral one. We absolutely have always seen this in terms of, you know, big picture declaration of our global citizenship, but I also think as a tool in a way, our positioning at the UN has allowed us always to speak freely about our values and principles that I mentioned there, and to try and see how we can leverage the relationships we have across the 193 member states of the UN to deliver on those convictions. Now, we came on, as you said, through a very tough campaign. I was here for 3 years leading a very active team on that. And one thing that was quite clear was that we never ever saw or said that going on to the council was an opportunity for Ireland to push or promote our own foreign policy agenda. We always saw it, first of all, as a representative role. We're voted on by the General Assembly, so we carry with us the interests of the small island states, of African member states, and of other groups, including, I would always call it, the more vulnerable parts of our global society, whether that's women in conflict or youth in challenge situations, in terrorist environments, for example. We bring all that with us to the table. We see coming at the Security Council opportunity as one where we can grow our relationships and our footprint globally. I think there are more countries looking and thinking about what Ireland is doing in foreign policy today than they were at this time last year. I also think it's a way of growing our influence and our relationships and networks. And that's where certainly your global reach is so critical to everything that we do here. But to do any of that, in my view, we have to start by listening. We're listening to those countries who are most affected by conflict, other hardships. We never go into a Security Council debate here without meeting with the country in question. Believe it or not, that's actually quite remarkable amongst member states. So if we're discussing Somalia, we will sit and discuss Somalia with the representative before the council debate. We listen to our colleagues, not just around the Security Council table, that we have to do, but we listen to our colleagues in the GA. So we keep going back to the General Assembly, to that broad representative body, to take the temperature of the water, to understand better where basically where the lie of the land is in terms of issues. Many of the issues we deal with are not just country specific, they're regional. So we need to keep in touch with what's happening in the General Assembly, and absolutely importantly with you and with civil society. I always say in that context, women and youth, but also increasingly I add to that survivors, because we're dealing with such challenge and dangerous situations. It's only really when we have the full picture that we can act in a constructive way. Now, you know, we are living, you said it, Finola, in an environment that's fraught, but also where we're seeing local, regional, and the global issues colliding. They're colliding with increasing speed, frequency, and certainly with force. I mean, they know no borders, they carry no passports. You just think of Horn of Africa, what's happening from Somalia to Tigray is one example, just in one part of the Horn. Think of the Middle East today, what's happening, as you said, in Gaza, but the broader regional context plays into that. So we also, of course, have seen that an issue like COVID demonstrates clearly that there really are no borders to issues that we have to deal with. Unilateral approaches proven time again, very clearly in the last 4 years, unilateral approaches simply don't work. They're inadequate. Indeed, I would add they're risky. And we believe that multilateralism is actually the key to solving this. Now, we had a high-level debate in the Security Council. We're under the Chinese presidency this month. We have a rotating monthly presidency. And the Chinese had a remarkable debate. First time I've seen since we came on, all the members of the Security Council were represented at least foreign minister level. Our own Minister Coveney spoke, I thought, brilliantly. It was one of the best outings we've had. There were a lot of big thoughts at that debate. But the truth is, when it comes down to it, I think people will trust multilateralism when they see that it actually works. And we can only show that by coming together, we can achieve more than we can do in the proverbial way of being alone. Or at least I would say that we can show them that we can better understand the nature of the challenges that we're trying to deal with through a multilateral angle of entry. Sometimes solutions are quite region or country specific, but that multilateral approach critical. So that's why we, I think, at the Security Council have to make a special effort to show that that works. And the Security Council doesn't always live up to its responsibility. And I would use that, you know, probably fairly in a convincing way, even after 4 months. We need to be able to show the Security Council can constructively and in good faith, and that's not unimportant, address the issues on its agenda. I mean, these are issues that affect the lives of millions and millions of people around the world. I've never had a job where I can say, and I'm a long time doing this, that, you know, there are life and death issues on my desk every day. And today, as you say, a long day ahead of me, we will start with Gaza and we move into Yemen. So I don't need to say more to all of you who understand what that means. I think the Council's inaction in face of growing challenges has also a risk, a big risk, in that it can breed mistrust. Now, we've seen that in the failure to act quickly and robustly in the beginning, certainly, to the COVID pandemic. And in recent years, I would have to single out the Council's inadequate response to Syria. 10 years down the road, we really are still in a horrific situation on the ground in Syria. And unfortunately, I faced today another briefing with Martin Griffiths, a resilient, tireless special rep on Yemen, who comes back and tells us time and again that we're back to square one, -2 or +2. It's really heartbreaking in many ways as we listen to these discussions. So I think you asked me to say, Finola, how we are after 4 months. I think we're where we should be, and I think we're delivering on what we promised to do. I might say that, of course, it's a roller coaster. I won't hide that. There are highs and lows, the frustration of those Syria-Yemen debates where you just can't get the engagement or the political will to move it on. But on the other hand, there are moments when I wake up and I say, well, this is what we came to the Council to do. And recently we had one of those in the leading role we took on the humanitarian and the human rights situation in Tigray in Ethiopia. We brought that issue ourselves to the table. So Ethiopia is not a Security Council agenda item. So we had to find a way to actually get it into the Council. We brought that twice as what they call in any other business, but it means getting it on the agenda of the Council. And we led the negotiation of the Council's actually first statement on the crisis. 5 months into that crisis, the Council had remained silent. So we broke the silence, and we are continuing here to keep it at the top of the agenda. We know on the ground the situation remains dire. We know unless we keep focused, the Council won't be seized of it. So there are serious challenges today, as we're speaking, in terms of access for humanitarian workers, particularly in rural areas. very, very concerned. Even yesterday had a discussion on this about the severe food insecurity threat that's actually growing. And of course, the failure to plant in rural areas because of the security situation means they're building up another risk for a couple of months on food security. And of course, it's a man-made threat. I mean, that we know. So we're monitoring the situation in Tigray very closely. Our approach is to try and bring all of the perspectives together. I speak regularly with the Ethiopian representative here. We're working very closely with our African colleagues on the council, as well as, of course, the fellow council members. There are divergences, you know, that's what this business is about, but we're determined to make sure that the council can do what it must. And you used the term Finola in your introduction, and that's accountability. We firmly believe that the council needs to show accountability in this case in Tigray, and sexual gender-based violence is one of the aspects, but one in this case. And we are working with our colleagues in Geneva, with Michelle Bachelet's office, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, to make sure that as we try to assist the basic crisis that they're dealing with on the ground, that we're also ensuring there will be accountability for crimes committed. I mean, the second area I'll quickly mention is Myanmar. Everyone watching carefully, that's on our agenda in the council, but the reports in recent weeks more and more disturbing. We know there's a humanitarian emergency unfolding in Rakhine State with the Rohingya. We've seen that, and we also know that women have been in the front line of peaceful protests, and so are now highly likely to find themselves detained, and unfortunately in a Myanmar historically proven way, to find themselves abused. And sexual abuse of women and detainees in Myanmar is something we're very seriously looking at right now. There are differences clearly in the council on Myanmar, but we have, I think, to point to one area where the council is acting, we have managed to speak with one voice. It may not be the voice that we would use were we speaking alone. It may not say everything Ireland would want to say alone, but I think the weight of the council with some big regional actors, not least China, India, in there, agreeing on a common message from the council is important, and we know it's watched and listened to in Myanmar. Syria, I mentioned, contentious, toxic, political debate, 10 years of a brutal conflict. I mean, what we're doing there is focusing very much on the humanitarian crisis. 13 million people in need. I mean, it's a remarkable number, really. 13 million people, 4 million of them just behind the one border crossing that works right now at Bab al-Hawa from Turkey into Syria. Our role on the council as what we call a co-pen holder on Syria is that Norway and Ireland are working in the next weeks to try and renew the Security Council mandate for at least that one, if not more than one, crossing remains open to deal with the situation that we just heard from OCHA, from Mark Lowcock, who directs the humanitarian effort here, is a much worse situation than was prevailed last year. Women's Day, I can't but go back to your reference to the CSW and to say that we have, of course, taken on the role of a co-chair of Women, Peace and Security on the council. And on International Women's Day here, we host the first informal meeting of the council under our watch on the critical issue of women's participation in UN-led processes. So calling on the UN to live up to what it says it will do, which is to make sure that women are on delegations, that they're on lists, that they get an opportunity to be elected, that they get to the peace table. Places like Libya and Yemen, where peace processes are being formed. We're watching what's happening in Afghanistan with great concern. So bringing together an informal discussion around that role, I think, was another sign of how we actually can complement what we have done so far in relation to the empowerment of women on the council, and we're still working on that. Climate and security, I'm watching the time. I know that you'd like me to stop soon. Climate and security, we're also co-chairing that. Just in case you think we spend time on the screen and not at work. So we're co-chair of the Climate and Security Group on the Council, priority for our term. We know the impact that climate insecurity has on the stability in societies, from famine to mass displacement. We're seeing massive impact from climate insecurity. We know, frankly, also that not everyone on the council agrees, and it's no secret to say that Russia and China are particularly cautious about linking or broadening the concept of security to link it to climate. We're working avidly on that. And then just on the role of civil society, as I come close to the end of the few words I wanted to say, look, I said to you, we have such a long-standing commitment to ensuring that civil society's voice is heard here. I regularly meet with the umbrella civil society group here. I know at headquarters there's engagement with you. We're receiving tremendous support domestically and internationally here on the specific issues, from women, peace and security, through climate, through Libya, Yemen discussions, from direct first-hand knowledge from civil society. Deeply appreciate that. And we want to keep that as an ongoing open dialogue. We do our utmost to ensure civil society voices at the Security Council table, and we will continue to do that. I have to say that COVID has not helped us in that there has been, in a way, a rolling back of broader participation. Other member states don't get to the table these days in the constrained circumstance we're in, and that has a knock-on effect. But we will continue as we emerge from the pandemic to work on that. And then just really to wrap up with the SDGs, you know the pivotal role that Ireland played in that agenda. Indeed, John Gilroy, who's online with us this morning, was on the team here, key member in pushing that agenda through with my predecessor, David Donoghue. It's, 6 years since we delivered on it, 15 years to get there. People thought it would be impossible. We've seen what we can do in a year with the pandemic. So, I'm not a naysayer when it comes to delivering on that. But I must say the pandemic has just made the SDG delivery infinitely harder. We know that challenged societies are now have had to redirect resources away from some of the goals into survival. If I want to put it bluntly, that's money and resources. So we believe that, it is a transformation agenda. We're committed to it. The greatest ambition for those SDGs is what lies in between the individual goals. But now we're looking at a big challenge. And, while I was on the CSW as the chair for 2 years, we certainly grant a gender perspective. At the toughest time, I'll say, we chaired the CSW during 2 years when the United States was part of a real global pushback against that agenda. We're in better shape now, at least in the sense of the United States being on board. There are countries closer to Dublin who have been part of that global rollback. So I would say that on the gender agenda, we're hugely active, building on what we did in the CSW, building on what we have in SDG 5, but it's not an agenda that I would say that we in any way could relax in terms of our achievements. So look, I'll leave it at that by saying that, I think I don't need to repeat to all of you how committed the Irish government is, how committed the Irish Foreign Service is to making sure that we're not on the Security Council, or we will never be looked at as being there for ballast. We are there to make a difference. We're there not for the numbers. We're not there for rhetorical reasons. So we've got our sleeves rolled up and we're working on very concrete, specific implementation issues rather than broad breaking the boundary issues. I think that we've proven in the past nationally. If you think back to, I'm still amazed when I think back to 60 years ago when some of my predecessors walked in the door here and managed to deliver on the NPT. We were critical to the non-proliferation treaty. We did it, as I said, on both CSW and the SDGs. I think we bring a uniqueness to the way we go about our business here. And to what we are, we're seen as a country that has a sort of reflection of so many others in the UN, where I mentioned small and peripheral, others suffer from that. We're a wealthy country, but we've known poverty and hunger. We're an EU member state, but we definitely carry the scars of our colonization. And the fact that our culture is known internationally, no accident, we've had to export our people, and we know that. So I think the power of that sort of profile in itself helps us. But of course, we need to get on with the job, and we won't do that without going to the heart of the mission. The Charter says we should be about saving succeeding generations from the scourge of war. And we can't do that by just putting our finger in the dike every time. We absolutely have to get down to preventing conflict. And that's where that broader base of our work with you, of our work with the GA, bringing in the SDGs into the funnel, so that when we're at the council table, we actually have the muscle to make progress and to deliver on what I think is the baseline objective, which is to address the root causes of conflict so we can get through. And that for me is everything from education, empowerment, equality, prosperity. The whole agenda is there. We're at the pointy end as we sit at the table every day to talk about the country specific. That's all backing us up. So Finola, I went on a little longer than I planned, but it's nice to have an opportunity to speak to people who are interested. Thanks, Finola.
Not at all. Yeah, and fascinating, Ambassador. That's really, you know, such a breadth of work there, and so much that you're covering, and so much energy that you bring to it, as well as values and principle, and that huge commitment to multilateralism. I have questions flooding in, so what I'm going to do, and I know we're a little bit pressed for time from you, but I think that I get 4 people to ask questions. I am going to ask people to be really brief, because we want to hear the answers. I think the answers will be more fascinating than the questions. So they have touched on a lot of things that you have already spoken about. I know that I'm going to ask people to ask them in person, but please be brief. Dominic McSorley had a question. I know that linked in with your food security. Suzanne has a question, and I'm going to ask Caoimhe de Barra, and then I'm going to pick a 4th, but let me get the 3 of those first. So Dominic, Suzanne, and then Caoimhe, please.
Thanks, Finola, and Ambassador, just really appreciate the insights and the candor, and I think everything you're saying we are 100% supportive of. You know, I think the way that the mission is working in there with listening and agility is actually what we aspire to and do overseas. So we're 100% behind. I guess just very specifically, I suppose, what you mentioned hunger and you mentioned conflict, and I think this is the real challenge that we have: rising unprecedented levels and seemingly a world that is not responding to the level that is needed. With the cuts now that we're all hearing and experiencing from FCDO in places like Somalia, South Sudan, across the board for agencies, this is having a huge impact when we should be scaling up. I guess my question is kind of around, is this a topic of discussion at the Security Council more generally in relation to member states' contributions? And if there's any advice that you think that we could and should be doing to potentially counteract that. Thank you so much.
If I might come in there, if I may, Ambassador, my name's Suzanne Keating. I'm the CEO of Dóchas. And again, just to kind of echo a lot of the comments coming through on the chat, just really appreciate your energy and enthusiasm, and so important just to get to the basics about talking about humanity. Really inspiring. And again, just want to thank you, and thanks from many people on the call. I understand also we have a fellow Drogheda citizen who is probably going to claim you right now as well. But if I may just put a question though, even just listening to you there, I thought, my gosh, if we just had you in a camera talking to the Irish public, because one of the challenges we have, and we've been talking about it in our AGM, is how do we get the public behind issues that are quite complicated, like multilateralism, like human rights, like, you know, international development. I'm just wondering, you know, is there something we can be doing more of? How are you seeing about that in your own campaign? We need to bring the people along with us in Ireland as well as everywhere else. Just wondering if you've got any ideas around that, but thank you very much.
And Ambassador, are you okay to take a 3rd question? I know you may be pressed for time to leave, so we'll Caoimhe, if you'd like to come in, and if let's see if we have time for any more after that. So Caoimhe, please.
Thanks, Finola. Ambassador, again, thank you very much for your input and for the work of your team in New York, Dublin, and indeed around the world. We really appreciate the very close engagement. So my question is around how Ireland can play a role in making sure that the voices of diverse women from civil society and people affected from crises can be heard directly at UN Security Council level and can have an impact on outcomes. Thank you.
Okay, we might leave it there, Ambassador, for the moment, and see if you can answer those ones, please.
Sure, if it's okay with you, I'll go in reverse order. Caoimhe, you know, I can tell you that that question is on my mind every single day here. And, you know, this week, a good week where we had Nadia Murad, for example, sitting with us at the council. I added that word survivors into the list of the group of people that we pay particular attention to here, because I think that that we find very often women are much more both in tune, if I can put it like that, and able to articulate the actual reality of the humanitarian issues that they're facing, very often, unfortunately, of the abuse they've faced, someone like Nadia Murad, but also hugely able on the solution front. And so we are, you know, Nadia, of course, has been involved in the follow through in the Yazidi situation, to getting bodies returned just this week with UNITAD, and you know, an incredible example of a civil society survivor. We ourselves advocate at every meeting to hear from civil society. As I say, the COVID period hasn't been great for that, but we're determined ourselves. We have you know, an opportunity to bring civil society into discussions, for example, in our Women, Peace and Security group. We have had women recently, before the formal meetings of the group, briefings from women this week, indeed, I'll say, from Lebanon, which is, you know, another conflict situation. So you may not see people behind the scenes. They're briefing the work of the council. Getting them to the table is that important step, and not just getting them to the table, but frankly then following through on implementing. Nadia is a good example, because there is actually a mechanism that allowed her views to be then translated into action. Fully on board for doing that. And believe you me, we will be reaching into you as we go through this 2-year period, looking specifically for support in if you like, sourcing women briefers and civil society briefers writ large. Suzanne, look, again, also a really important issue about how do we engage the public and communicate. My own view is that the conceptual approaches just doesn't register with people, and the terminology we use here at the UN really is not it's not public friendly at all. So I mean, we have made a dedicated effort. I did a little op-ed in January as we went on, and we got a big reaction to that. We do pieces to camera here and there, just on a daily basis, saying what's happening. Al Jazeera last night, for example, on Gaza, we're interested in hearing. I think the country-specific situations are critical. And your role, Suzanne, if you gave me this opening, as they say in court, so I'm now going to take it, Syria humanitarian, we have about 5 weeks to go to save that crossing, and that's what we're involved in. So hearing from you, from those of you who have actors on the ground, who are linked into bigger organizations, who have humanitarian workers in Syria, speaking about the reality that ordinary people are facing on the ground, stripping away the big power politics. This is about 4 million people. I asked Mark Lowcock the other day, can you just tell me what will happen if that crossing is not renewed on the 10th of July? What will happen? And he said, catastrophe. There will be a big humanitarian crisis. There will be no food. It may not be on the 11th of July, but be sure in 2 weeks, people will begin to see supplies run out. There won't be medical cover. There won't. So, you know, telling the public what the actual reality is, you know, sometimes we feel we can't bear too much reality. I'm all in favor of it at the moment, I have to say. And I think you have an absolutely credible voice, much more than mine in many ways. I'm, you know, too distant from it in the eyes of some members of the public, but you certainly can bring it. And one thing we tried to do in Foreign Affairs, and I know we're ongoing, is also to bring it into schools. I'm such a believer. I never refuse an opportunity to speak to schools or young people, no matter what, because I think A, they deserve it, and I wish somebody had done it with me, but B, they absolutely are influencers, and they can inform the way society looks at a conflict in Yemen or Syria, and seeing their own peers, young women in Drogheda, whoever you are out there from Drogheda High, young women in Drogheda who see that girls, 150 million girls are now out of school. I mean, it's just shocking and may never get back there again. So I think the communication part, Suzanne, is really to try and stay as evidence-based as we can. We need help on the Syria humanitarian resolution. We need articles, we need speeches, we need as many people speaking about how critical it is that we do not seal these people into their fate. And that's what will happen if we can't renew. And finally, Dominic, great to see you, Dominic. You touched on an issue, Antonio Guterres is running, as you all know, for re-election as Secretary General. And he had a public hearing the other day. And I managed, as the very last ambassador, way down the list, to get my hand up and in. And the question I asked him was exactly yours, Dominic. Hunger and conflict. How do we, that's the acute responsibility that we have here at the UN, in my view. Ireland is the focal point, or responsible for, in other words, the hunger and conflict linkage on the Security Council with Niger. And we are working on it extremely hard. I mentioned Tigray, but of course, we're going to see it in Myanmar. We're seeing it in Yemen. We know it's there already in Ethiopia. I mentioned Tigray. So you ask, what does the resource and the crisis part of this sort of link up at the Security Council? My straightforward answer, of course, is that the Security Council doesn't have responsibility or a role in funding. But every single time we discuss an issue like Yemen or Tigray, Syria is another good example of that, the humanitarian voice, and I'm a firm believer we need that at the table in the debate. Today, Mark Lowcock will address the Council on Yemen, the raging famine with millions of people dying. He will consistently point to the drop in resources for Yemen. There is a fatigue underway in terms of baseline support for food security. And Dominic, I'm sure you know that better than anyone. So we do insist that we link the big politics to the reality again, coming back to Suzanne's point about actually showing what this means. It's not just about getting the Houthis to stop firing into Erbil. It's about making sure that the people have something to eat. And the investment in the politics, it pales when it compares to what we should be doing on the humanitarian side. So we are actually working very hard. We're increasing our own contribution, for example, in Ethiopia. As we push on the political side, we're supporting on the economic side. But that hunger and conflict causal link, we know that conflict is the biggest driver of hunger. I'm not saying if we solve all the conflicts, we won't have hunger, but of course we will have solved a big part of the current crisis we're facing. So we will appreciate all wisdom and advice, Dominic, particularly from Concern, where we know you have a long history and knowledge, like many on the screen this morning. But we are working on it. I asked Guterres about that the other day. He spoke more about the funding side than he did about the causal link. But I think it's a big challenge going forward. So Finola, again, longer answers, but it's been a pleasure to speak to you. I'm supposed to be somewhere else now.
Of course, yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for your passion, your energy, and for that fantastic presentation this morning, Ambassador. And I hope you'll come back again. We would love to have you at another point, maybe towards the end of your term. But thank you.
With pleasure.
So much. Yeah, and
with pleasure.
We will continue to collaborate. Thanks so much.
Best wishes.